to Nothing But a Number. Today I'm absolutely delighted to have the Right Hon Nigel Evans as my guest, a distinguished politician, dare I say it. Nigel with over 3 decades of parliamentary experience. Nigel graduated with a BA in politics from Swansea University in 1979, whilst also contributing to the family's long-standing convenience store. So I think you're son of a shopkeeper.
I am. In fact, I was a shopkeeper.
In a fine conservative tradition. Your political career covers roles, frontbench spokesman, member of various select committees, but you're, I think, obviously best known as Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons. Welcome, Nigel.
Thanks, Jo.
It's been quite a week or a couple of weeks.
Hugely emotional. It was emotional chairing the last day in Parliament when people did their valedictory speeches. And that moved me to tears on several occasions, seeing people like Tracy Crouch saying goodbye to the House for the last time, Andy Percy, lots of them. And that was quite moving. What I didn't realise, though, was that there were going to be a lot of other people who didn't get to give valedictory speeches, like myself. And it is what it is. I knew that the writing was on the wall when you have local elections in May, when we got hammered. You then are 20 points behind in the polls, and you decide to go for an early election. And I knew that was going to, unless something exceptional, almost of biblical proportions happened, we were going to get hammered again, and we were.
But in your particular case, I mean, I was quite surprised to learn because, you know, with your role as Deputy Speaker, I thought that people would be kind to you, or that maybe the opposition parties would make less of an effort to unseat you. But that clearly wasn't the case.
No, not at all. Once they realised, the opinion polls said that the Labour candidate was swinging back and forth. Sometimes she was ahead, other times I was ahead. They ploughed everything into the seat. They spent I think they spent more money than we did on the election campaign. And in the end, of course, 2 things did it for me, and I think probably replicated throughout most of the country, which was the stay-at-home Tories. My turnout was 5% lower, and I only lost by 800 votes, so that did it on its own. And then if you weren't picked off by the stay-at-home Tories, you were picked off by the silent snipers of the Reform Party. And I call them silent snipers because the candidates themselves, in most constituencies, did nothing. They put one leaflet out in the Royal Mail, which they are clearly allowed to do. They didn't spend an awful lot of money on it. And the entire campaign was basically seen through the prism of Nigel Farage, and people thought they were voting for him. And in my seat, they scored 8,500 votes, even though their candidate never turned up to anything. He never came to a hustings. The only thing he ever did was turn up to the result. And it cost me my seat. The other thing as well, I guess, is when you're sitting on an 18,000 majority, people said to me, "You'll be okay." And they got this thing in their heads that irrespective of what they did, whether they stayed at home or wanted to protest and vote for reform, they thought I'd be okay because it's an 18,000. You can't possibly lose an 18,000 majority. And I argued the toss with a few of them on the doorstep and said, listen, the opinion polls say it's me or her. And it is very, very tight. It's a toss-up. But I'm afraid enough of them really just wanted to ensure that the message got home to the Prime Minister of the day, Rishi Sunak, and it did get through to him because he's left now with 251 fewer members of Parliament than he did on Wednesday last week.
It is shocking, isn't it? I mean, did it feel like a completely different election to all the elections that you've had in the past?
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. When you're consistently 20 points behind in the opinion polls, all of them had us hovering on 16 to 22 or 23%, and we were 20 points behind the Labour Party in every opinion poll. Whatever Rishi announced, the dial never moved. Yeah. He could have promised to part the waters. Mm-hmm. And somebody would have said, yeah, but that was done 2,000 years ago. Do something different. Yeah? Nobody believed that he would ever be Prime Minister to deliver the Triple Lock Plus or to do the National Service or do anything. Mm-hmm. They knew it was going to be Keir. And so the campaign was almost irrelevant and then was derailed a few times by the D-Day departure early. Betgate, that was 6 days of the campaign gone, whilst that really did hog the headlines. And so just trying, well, I pivoted away from the national campaign after 2 weeks. I decided it was actually going to cost me more votes if I kept outputting national publications. And so I stopped and I just spoke about local issues, all the things that I'd done over 32 years. And thanks to that, I probably did better than I otherwise would have done.
So, as Deputy Speaker, you couldn't be seen to be, pro-government or politically active for 4 years, basically. Yep. How much do you think that affected, the outcome as well, or do you think it was just the mood of the nation?
No, I got a few people who said, but you don't vote and you don't speak, so we're not getting proper representation. And there's always, it's unknown, but there are 3 deputies and there's 1 speaker, and it's normally the speaker from whichever party they are. In Lindsay's case, he was elected as a Labour politician, and then the chairman of Ways and Means goes Conservative, first deputy chairman Labour, second deputy chairman Conservative, and they never vote. And basically your votes are cancelled out. So it really doesn't impact on the body politic unless it's a vote of conscience. But not being able to speak in the House it does count against you, because you don't get the you don't get the publicity. And also, I'm not doing TV interviews or radio interviews. During Brexit, I wasn't off the box.
Yeah.
I was wall to wall arguing the case for Brexit, and not doing that for 4.5 years does cost you somewhat brand knowledge by the public. But at the end of the day, as being an effective MP, what you do is you ask a minister to come and see you, and they come. And so on things like the cybersecurity force, which Boris said was going to go to the north of England, there was stiff competition between Manchester and ourselves. And I and Lindsay Hoyle campaigned hard. We saw Boris 3 times. We saw the Foreign Secretary twice. We saw the Defence Secretary. And we managed to get it and win it. That's 3,500 incredibly well-paid jobs, and of course making Britain more secure. It's coming to the Ribble Valley. So if I'm going to do anything as legacy, that's my legacy.
And that's a brilliant legacy. I mean, certainly what you say is absolutely right in terms of access. Clearly having a high profile within Parliament, even if you're not allowed to speak, is very useful. I mean, going back to how you campaigned and the national message versus the I've been a great MP for you for the last 32 years message. Were you frustrated that, I mean, in earlier leaflets, I suppose, there was a kind of focus on a presidential style of campaign of basically saying, this is what the Prime Minister says on all these issues, and far less focus on, in terms of literature that was put out on what your local MP has achieved for you locally? Yeah,
increasingly it's gone that way. But having said that, there's got to be exceptions. You saw the Bristol shock with Thangham Debonell losing her seat to a Green.
Yeah.
And so clearly something had been going on there. I assume, I haven't looked, but I assume that the local representation by the Greens is way stronger than it is in other areas. So things like that happen. And of course the Labour MP losing in Blackburn. But it's become increasingly presidential over the years, with Tony Blair making it that way. I guess Margaret Thatcher was a bit like that. And clearly David Cameron, Rishi Sunak, absolutely. It's become presidential in the way that it's done. And of course, I mentioned reform earlier on. If it hadn't have been for Nigel Farage, they wouldn't have had much of a campaign.
Yeah.
He is a one-man band. I referred to him once as like a fruit machine in a pub. Every 3 minutes, if nobody's played it, it has to make a noise. And so Nigel had to remind people he was there. And he's done it with great success. And I don't blame, I've got to say this, I've got to get that off my chest.
Yeah.
I don't blame people for staying at home, the stay-at-home Tories. And I don't blame people for voting reform because they believed that we hadn't delivered on what we promised. We got a stonking majority in 2019, and sadly, because of COVID, We were derailed for almost 2 years because of that. Then we ended up with a £400 billion debt that then had to be managed. So Jeremy Hunt couldn't have been as generous as he otherwise would have been. So all of these things helped to derail us. And then, of course, a plethora of events, dear boy, that made MPs having to resign and bring shame on the Tory party. So in the end, people go, I can't bring myself to vote Tory. And so we ended up where we were. The amazing statistic, though, of Thursday, if not the 251 Tory losses, was the incredibly low overall vote of the Labour Party, 34%. And they've got a stonking landslide majority. It's incredible. And even the Lib Dems on a really low national figure, ending up with over 70 members of Parliament. I mean, I've just bumped into Ed Davey in the House of Commons a moment ago. He gave me a big hug and I said, it's okay, Ed. You lot weren't responsible for me going. In fact, I wished his lot had done a bit better and then I might have been okay. It's going to take an operation to remove the smile off his face because who could have thought that he was going to end up...
That's the bungee jump that did that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you can't say it was a policy heavy that got him the 71 seats. He did a number of it's a knockout antics. And I just think in the end, people thought, right, the Lib Dems are second in this seat. We're going to switch our votes.
It was tactical.
It's the tactical voting par excellence. And do you know, to elect a Labour MP took 23,000 votes. To elect a Tory took over 50,000 votes, but to elect a Reform, it was over 1 million votes. Reform scored more votes nationally than the Lib Dems. They end up with 5, Lib Dems end up with over 70. And so it's making me now reflect on whether the current political system is one that's fit for purpose in an era when we have multi-party democracy. We've got 4 or 5 parties, depending on whether you're in Wales or Scotland, and all of a sudden you're finding quirky results, and therefore the national result is grotesquely distorted, depending on which seat you happen to be in.
Yes, I think maybe the Lib Dems will be slightly less keen on proportional representation now.
Well, they've been asked and they have said, well, it was in our manifesto. They may not be banging the drum as heavily as they used to be, but I wouldn't be surprised if whoever leads the Tory party, that is now going to be one of the new policies, that new Tory party. I mean, as you know, PR, listen, I've never been in favour of PR before, but I looked at what happened on Thursday and thought, this ain't right. There are all sorts of forms of PR that I'm sure can be looked at. I've always believed in the representation of a certain person in a certain constituency, and you can't do that on a list system. No. But there are other systems that are there that are still proportional, which might be able to deliver that personal touch and be way fairer or proportionate in who gets elected to Parliament.
Yeah. Well, you made a point about low voter turnout as well.
Oh, shocking. In Wales, some seats had less than 50% turnout.
Gosh.
It was a 56% turnout in Wales nationally.
I mean, should we consider compulsory voting?
No, I wouldn't go down that route, but I would think that there is an existential threat to the democracy of our country when almost in Wales, half the people decide there's something better to do on polling day than go and vote. I heard Neil Kinnock speak this morning on radio about, people fought long and hard to get the vote, and to see it being abused in the way that it was on Thursday has got to be incredibly worrying. And I think that all politicians at Westminster now should reflect on that and work out how it is that you build trust. Because clearly trust had been badly shattered over the past 4.5 years, whether it was Partygate, whether it was Betgate, it didn't really matter. Yeah. There was some reason why people thought, they're all a bunch of shysters, I'm not bothering. And I'm afraid to get such a drop in the national overall turnout has got to be worrying. And I think that whether you're Keir Starmer or whoever's going to lead the Tory party or the Lib Dems, you've got to look again at how you build that trust, because It's not right that so few people actually took part in the democracy that we had the other day.
And do you think it's also partly to do with the fact that they couldn't differentiate between the parties? I mean, Labour have kind of moved their tanks onto the Conservative lawn, that kind of going to the middle, and people really... I mean, I was quite frustrated that we didn't articulate a vision for the future. Yes. Because, having sort of missions that relate to sorting out problems from the past is not enough to motivate people to vote for you for the next 5 years. And the giving people a reason to vote for you, I think, is a fundamental duty of any political party, and I'm not sure that the...
Well, let's analyse that, Jo, right? What was the campaign all about? It was Keir Starmer saying, vote for me because I'm not them. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Vote for change. I wonder if many of your listeners or viewers could actually work out what his policies happen to be, because it wasn't policy rich. The Tories, even though they'd been in power under Rishi for a year and a half, had way more policy initiatives. I was dazzled by the daily announcement as to new policies. I wish Rishi had stayed in power and just enacted them as policies. Yeah, exactly. Rather than saying
these are a few months earlier.
These are our policies, not our promises. Or started a bit earlier with them. So saying just vote for change was clearly attractive, but not that attractive that the Labour Party didn't manage to get 45% of the vote, which is what all the polls said that they were going to get. It's quite dramatic to start a campaign with 45% in the polls and then to end up with 34%. Yeah. So a 6-week campaign, cost you 10%. Really? So that was telling in itself. Right. Whoever takes over as leader of the party, and I understand the vote for the chair of the 22 is taking place either tomorrow or the day after, then they will be able to set the rules for the leadership campaign. Whoever takes over, what I want to see is the membership, the dwindled, savaged membership of the Conservative Party having a full say in who that candidate is going to be, who their new leader is going to be. But also, I think what everybody wants to hear is the vision thing. What you just spoke about is, why should I vote for you? Yeah. What is it that you are going to promise? And when you do promise it, you get elected, you better deliver. And if there's another take-home warning that Keir Starmer should listen to very carefully, it is that in 2019, Boris Johnson won a stonking majority of 80-seat majority by saying, we're going to get Brexit done, because it had been stifled by the Labour opposition, as you recall. And that 80-seat majority was overturned to an incredible landslide for the Labour Party on Thursday night, Friday morning. If Keir doesn't deliver on what the people want, then I think the electorate have just proven that they are sufficiently bright to work out who they need to vote for to get rid of the change candidate. So you change once, you can change again. I know, change is a very powerful message. If you don't like what's going on, change it. And that's what the public did on Thursday night.
Yes, and I think that the assumption that you reach a certain age and then you vote for a certain political party is for the birds, because the age at which they used to say that people voted Conservative has gone up from sort of 40 to 57, and now, I mean, I don't know what the analysis is of this election, but
almost dead.
Well, yes. I mean, I know we're all getting older.
The campaign actually focused on senior citizens in a very, very specific way. I came across one person who came up to me who was 18 and said, I'm voting for you today, Nigel. I got excited. Yeah. It's the only one. Otherwise, they tended to be elderly people. They used to say, Jo, that if you weren't a socialist when you were a student, you didn't have a heart. Yeah. And if you were still a socialist when you were 50, you didn't have a brain. Yes.
But I think that's kind of slightly changed, and I got sort of annoyed at the idea that once you hit a certain age, you become more staid and more Conservative with a small c, because I think certainly for my generation, the baby boomers, that I was quite radical in my 20s, and therefore I'm not sure that I voted for anybody in my 20s. That's by the by. But it's kind of your core values remain with you. You may kind of articulate them in a different way.
You were an early adopter of staying at home when you were 20. As I met, you were well ahead of the game.
And I didn't understand policy, and so I've done a lot of work with young people through the APPG for Youth Affairs.
Yeah.
And they all said, nobody talks to us about democracy, so we actually need, it should be on the curriculum in the schools, and I think we have a problem with that, don't we, about sort of how it's taught impartially. But I'm sure you'll have come across people who say, well, I don't know how to vote. People in their 30s who've never voted and who've never been engaged with the democratic process. They don't properly
understand. People genuinely
absolutely.
Thought on Thursday in my seat that if they voted Reform, they were voting for Farage.
Yeah.
It's pointless trying to explain it to him that it's a chap from Wigan actually you're voting for. It didn't even come from my patch. It's really strange. And the other thing, right? Yeah, get it in the schools. Yeah, there's always going to be problems of getting it taught impartially. But I've got friends who have been educated in the LSE. Let's just say that they tilt to the left there. But my friends come out bigger Tories and argue their case. And the other massive change, I think, that's taken place has been, of course, the rise of social media. Yeah. The fact that you're able to do what you're doing now and get an audience. Mm-hmm. You couldn't have done that before social media came about. I'll just say this to the newly elected members of Parliament, all really excited over at Westminster today, picking up their passes. They used social media to great effect, but it's a bit of a cesspit, I found. And it doesn't matter, even if you put up nice messages, the trolling that takes place is quite incredible. I mean, I don't respond to them, but you do get to see some of them. And even when I put up a video to say, wish my new successor well, I did it, I recorded it at 5:20 in the morning and put it up, and it's had over 2 million views. Mm-hmm. And unbelievably, a lot of fantastic, well done, superb. But people are going, you deserve to lose your job. It's almost like, hey, I'm down, and now you want to give me a good kicking. Do us a favour, take a day off the keyboard. Yeah. The people have spoken. You don't need to add to what they've already said. It's really, and I feel sorry for these new MPs because they are going to have to learn their politics and play out their politics in an atmosphere that is way more Verbally violent than has ever been the case before. Yes,
I think that the abuse on social media is something that I'm not sure that MPs have to learn to live with. We may have to do more in terms of the online abuse legislation, because let's face it, some of our colleagues have had threats, of kidnap and threats to life, and it shouldn't be that in taking on a public service role you end up putting yourself and your family in the case of MPs with young families who felt threatened. You're listening to Nothing But a Number, the podcast that looks at age and ageing with a wide array of fabulous guests. We've got some brilliant guests coming in the next few weeks, and if you want to be notified when the next upload is, please subscribe and click the notification bell, and we'll tell you exactly what's coming next.
2 decent MPs, Jo Cox and David Amos, being murdered. And then on the other, you've got people like Rishi Sunak, who had to take racial abuse in the way that, and as he explained, my daughters read this. Just think about that for a second. Nobody should have to put up with that. A lot of it is just unpleasant and rude. Mm. It doesn't. They're not committing a crime by telling me that I'm completely useless and deserve to lose my job. They're just not being incredibly pleasant. Mm. They're just being rude. And, it says way more about them than it ever does about the person who is their victim. But I'm afraid there is an army of keyboard warriors out there. And I don't know what their politics are. I'm not going to say that it's just the domain of one political party. Some of them may have no political party. Mm. But they feel as if it's okay to reach for the keyboard and say some of the most vile things to people without any due regard to their sensitivities at all. The fact that they've got families themselves who may be reading this vile rubbish. And I really don't know how we stop that, Joe. I really don't. But all I would say is that the 650 people who got elected on Thursday night deserve better. Yes. They really do deserve a chance to at least see what they can do. I think everybody who got elected on Thursday has done it with a promise of trying to improve the country. And that's why I was quite clear in saying, good luck to my successor. I wish to see her succeed. And I wish to see Keir Starmer succeed, because I don't believe that he's come in to make the country poorer or worse. They just genuinely have different means to an end. That's all. Yeah. And give them a chance.
Yes. No, I think that all politicians, one would hope that the motivation for everybody is to come in with public service in mind, and I think it is for the vast majority of all political parties. But
and as well, I'll just add this too. Yeah. Just reflect on this: the joy on their faces, right, at winning in 2024. Now, off camera, I said to you, of the 2019 intake on the Conservative side, how many survived? What's the answer?
Yeah, well, I think of 109, only 19, I believe, have survived.
Right, only 19. So they've done one term.
Yeah.
Now, of the 2024 intake on this incredible landslide on a distorted outcome because of the political system, how many of them are going to be around in 5 years' time? Mm. So give them a break, people. Yeah. Let them do their job. Absolutely. Because they'll be looking for another one, just like I am. Yeah. Mine, at least I had 32 years on the bunking Bronco, and some sadly only got 4.5 years.
Yeah. So, Nigel, the reason I set up the podcast, Nothing But a Number, was to look at age and ageism and ageing, because, I felt that certainly within politics, there seemed to be an age by which people thought it was too old to come into it. And I bucked the trend, and I believe I was the second oldest woman in the history of Parliament to come into the House of Commons, my first time at 67. And so I needed to kind of make a point. We see a lot of the other end of the scale coming in at this election, and I watched the baby of the house, the 22-year-old, and I just wanted your reflections on, and the House of Lords, obviously now they're looking at giving people their cards at 80. Whether you think that age should play a part in, who should be serving as a Member of Parliament, and, whether people should be stood down at a certain age.
Do you know, if David Attenborough, what is he, 90 something?
Exactly.
If he was standing for Parliament, he'd get elected. He's a national hero.
Yeah.
No, of course, I do not believe that age should ever be a barrier. If they are going to reform the House of Lords, I suspect if it's not elected, it'll be appointed for a term. Mm. But I would never say, once you reached 80, thanks, goodbye. Yeah. I mean, how stupid to do away with an incredible resource. In certain countries, age means wisdom. Yes. It's not universal, I know that. But I still think I'm 30-something and I'm 66, right? Yeah. I know. I'm fit. I do a lot of walking, and I love life. Mm. I absolutely love life. But I knew in my heart of hearts this was going to be my last general election, but I'd made that up in my own mind, and it had nothing to do with age. Yeah. It had everything to do with me thinking, right, well, I then will have done 37 years in Parliament, time to move on to other things. Mm. So all this has meant for me is now I'm going to look for other opportunities. Do you think I'm going to say, because I'm now in receipt of the state pension, that that's it, I'm going to put my feet up
absolutely.
and put my cardigan on and watch Netflix until The Undertaker knocks? You are joking. There are so many people out there, and indeed, of the 251 Tories who have just lost their seats, look at the skill base that is there. I'm delighted, by the way, that Sir Roger Gale got re-elected. What an amazing guy he is.
Absolutely.
And, of course, the new father of the house, Edward Lee. It's great to see people like Keir Mather and others being elected in their young 20s, and good luck to them. And I know that when I got elected, age 34, I think I was wet behind the ears, and it took me several elections until I realised actually that that place over there is part of the University of Life, and I was learning all the time. And it was great being put in as chair of the programme board for the restoration of Parliament, and wandering around bits of Parliament that I bet even you haven't been around the cloisters.
Sure.
And King Henry VIII wandered around there, and I was like in charge of this, and I was like a kid with a new toy, and I thought, wow, they've given me this responsibility. And it's only because I hadn't fallen off the bucking bronco earlier on that I got given that job. I just think. I used to go around talking to people, and I say there's no glass ceilings, right? If you're a woman, if you're a man, and no glass ceilings to entering Parliament, and it should be the same with age as well. And I'm delighted that actually at the more mature end of the spectrum, we've still got a lot of MPs there who have decided that they were going to give it another go. Like the Christopher Chopes of this world, who actually know where all the toilets are, as I joke. You do know where all the corridors are, and you're not going to get lost. Yeah. And I hope that my one piece of advice to the youngsters is go and sit down with them, have a chat. They'll learn a lot in a very short space of time. I would say drill down into that wisdom base that's there. There's only a bit of it. There's not too many that have been there that long. David Davis, another one. I'm really pleased that he got re-elected too in Halton Price. So use that resource. It's free.
But you're absolutely right that having colleagues who've been there a lot longer and know where the cloisters are is a great thing. But the way the electoral system is changing, or the people's voting patterns are changing, there will be more and more one-termers.
Yes.
And so, for Parliament as a whole, I think that's possibly a problem of kind of corporate memory and also the ability to learn on the job.
Yes. I think this is going to be the one of the big challenges of this Parliament, having so many people who are brand new to the job. I'm just waiting now for the first, troubles that exist in Parliament because of that. Yes. And there's huge support mechanisms in there now for MPs that weren't there when I was elected in 92. The induction lasts 2 weeks. My induction lasted 20 minutes. And that was Betty Boothroyd telling us at a meeting of the 22 committee that if you agree to pair with somebody on the other side, just keep the pair. Don't listen to the whips. You keep the pair. I mean, that was it. That was the induction. And you just had to, and you listened to other people. You were told to shut your mouth for the first 3 months and just pick things up. And so you had a lot of people helping you along the way. So I just think with so many new MPs there, there's Parliament's going to be poorer for it. Hey, listen, on the bright side, I guess there's going to be a lot of new ideas. Now then, one of the things that I think makes Parliament maybe a little bit less effective is that it decided to go to family-friendly hours. Now, going until 3 in the morning and 4 in the morning was never clever. But going until 10 p.m. on a Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, which is what we used to do, actually meant members were dining with one another, chatting with one another until 10 p.m. that night. It also meant that you could go and serve on a select committee in the morning and be in the chamber at 2:30. You never missed anything. So you didn't have to be in two places at once, or in this case, clearly you make a decision whether you're doing the chamber or doing your select committee. And what I pray doesn't happen is that they then all of a sudden look at custom and practice and go, well, I wonder why they do that. Wouldn't it be easier? I'll give you an example. Wouldn't it just be easier if we vote on our phones rather than vote physically as we do in the lobbies? In Canada, they vote on their phones. And I was sat opposite the Canadian minister a year ago, and she said, excuse me, I'm just voting. Now, you and I know why it's important to vote physically, because you don't see some of your colleagues for the whole of the day, but when there's a vote, you're in the lobby and you're chatting to them for 10 minutes, and you may go off and have a cup of coffee or tea with them, but you're chatting and it's a physical thing. If all of a sudden they decide it's a lot easier to vote on your phone, then that will make Parliament a poorer place. If I was them, I would do nothing for the first 2 to 3 years on changing procedure in the House. Just work out why it is that these practices and conventions exist, and then work out after 3 years whether you think it's worthwhile.
Well, we had it during COVID, didn't we?
Yeah.
For a brief period when we had the full lockdown, we had virtual voting, or voting on your phone or your iPads or whatever, and you didn't really feel involved in the debate.
It was a national emergency.
Yeah, exactly, and it had to be done, but there was no real debate during that time, because you were in the green room and going in on Zoom for 3 minutes, but then you had to come out and and
I mean, the one change that happened during COVID was that prior to that, we used to physically go in and give our names to a clerk who would tap it on an iPad,
right.
which was a modernisation in itself, because before that, there was the paper that they'd mark you on paper. And so voting with your pass against a pass reader is a modernisation which I endorse. I think it's cleverer. The results were coming back quicker.
So you're not a Luddite.
I'm not, and absolutely not a Luddite. But I think that change came through in a national emergency, and had we decided not to stick with it, we would have gone back to the iPad. But pass readers work, and it's sensible, but you're still physically going in to do it.
And I think there's a level of tradition where respect for, the sort of solemnity of the House is important. So I remember looking up the dress code in the sort of guide to how to behave, and it said, I don't know if you know this, that you're not allowed to wear sandals. So for the first year, throughout the whole summer,
That would be no Lib Dems came in.
I didn't wear any open-toed sandals, and I kept looking, thinking, well, there's some sandals over there and some sandals over there. And I think it was sort of, men in flip-flops was probably written at a time when sandals were a sort of, a dirty word that sort of would disrespect, and it was probably largely aimed at men rather than women.
Yeah.
But there actually isn't much of a dress code for women, is there? And I've seen,
for under John Bercow, of course, the tie went. And he made that decision. He said, no, you don't need to wear a tie, and that was that. And I thought that was a shame, even though I'm not wearing a tie for this. But in the chamber, I always wore a tie. I remember once John Bercow saying on my first day when I was elected as Deputy Speaker, there was me, Lindsay Hoyle and Dawn Primarola, and he said, right at the end of our first meeting, he said, has anybody said what you'll wear in the chair when you're acting as Deputy Speaker? And I said, yeah, I promised I would wear full morning dress. And Lindsay Hoyle said, so did I. And he went, oh. And so that tradition still carries on, and I do hope that when the new deputies are elected in a couple of weeks, that they carry on that tradition too, of when Eleanor and Rosie Winterton were in a sombre black dress, and the blokes were wearing morning dress, and Lindsay still wears morning dress too, which is great.
I think it's right.
And he's got the tie back. Men are now expected to wear ties.
I thought that men had to wear ties.
Yeah?
Yes.
No, but it went for a while.
Yes.
Oh, yes, it went for a long while.
Because I remember one noticeable moment that was captured by the media where Dame Eleanor called up Mr Gullis for not wearing a jacket on Zoom, when we were... And even though it was kind of from your own living room, it was necessary to sort of keep that tradition, because we had to remember that we were acting as members of Parliament in a formal way, even though we were all sitting in our living rooms or kitchens or bedrooms, wherever the laptop was all over the country.
There's a reason for it, and I mean, it'll be interesting to see if with all these newbies coming in, whether Lindsay can still have sufficient sway in ensuring that people do actually, they're not going to come in a t-shirt and jeans. There is a reason why we don't do that.
Yes. So, have you had time yet to think about what next?
Well, I did joke that I was going to start a political consultancy on crisis management and get the Tory party as my first client, and I'd earn millions of them alone.
Well, if they're prepared to pay.
Well, they haven't got any money.
Listen.
Yeah, do both, yeah. Well, I think there's poverty in both sections there.
Yes.
But I'm, as I say, 66, still breathing and kicking. And I just want to see what opportunities that there are, whether it's in the charity field or whether it is in the consultancy field. You and I have got an amazing amount of experience in how the body politic works. Both you and I went into politics to make the country better, and I hope that we, both of us departing, have at least got a legacy that we're proud of, and I am.
Yes.
I really am proud of my contribution. I am proud of the people that the unsung bits where everybody looks at Prime Minister's questions and thinks that's it. No, it's not. It's on a wet Saturday afternoon when we're sitting in some village hall where people come to us with their problems and they've got nobody else to turn to, and you help them. And over my 32 years, I've literally helped thousands of people with over hundreds of surgeries. My favourite one is somebody got in touch with me and said, the wedding, this is like on Tuesday, the wedding's on Saturday. We've lost our passports. We can't go on our honeymoon without them. Can you get us our passport? I stood up in Home Office questions, and Jack Straw was the Home Secretary, and I related the story, and I said, Home Secretary, will you ensure that my constituents are able to go on honeymoon on Saturday? They got their passports.
Fantastic.
I know. I thought this is just an impossible ask. There's only one way I can do this, and I had to leverage the whole weight of Home Office questions and Jack Straw to say yes, and he did. So tribute to Jack Straw, and I hope that the happily married couple are still getting on. They even got upgraded, they told me, on the cruise ship because it got a lot of publicity there.
I bet.
So there's lots of people that we've helped on the way.
Yes.
And the nice thing about having time to reflect on emails and messages I'm getting, apart from those odd ones that we referred to earlier on, is I'm getting so many lovely messages from people who say, thank you, and I in return want to say to them, thank you, because you gave me an opportunity that was an absolute dream 32 years ago to be the Member of Parliament for the most idyllic part of the country in the Ribble Valley, and you've re-elected me 8 times. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
That's brilliant. I always end with a couple of questions. The first is, what, with a wealth of experience that you have now, what piece of advice would you give to your much younger self, the person starting out on this journey?
I think it's the same advice that I was giving all the youngsters now, which is to listen to experience. Go and sit at the knee of those who've been around a long time and just listen. And, as you say, take the advice. Otherwise, you're going to find a lot of these people could be out well before 5 years if they get it wrong. So by all means, enjoy the success and congratulations that you will have on being elected. But if I was talking to 34-year-old Nigel Evans, I would have said, listen to the sage advice of a number of people who've been there way longer than you, and listen and follow it.
What about, say, the 16-year-old Nigel Evans starting in your school days and heading out before you went into politics?
Oh, what, if I'm talking to me as a schoolboy?
Yes.
I would say to him, knowing him quite well, you have got an absolute zest for life, the likes of which is, if you could bottle it, you'd make a fortune. Whatever you do, never let the light go out. Keep it going.
Fantastic. And a bucket list is the last question. I mean, you said, hopefully lots more sort of professional activities, but personal bucket list,
Stand on the moon.
Wow.
I want to go into space. Uh-huh. It's been one of my dreams. I met the last man to walk on the moon, Eugene Cernan, twice. I've seen shuttle launches. One of my best friends was on Discovery, and I got them into the public gallery, and I got them to number 10 to present David Cameron with a flag that had flown on the space station. And space has always excited me like nothing else. And I do believe that there's other planets out there where there's a Jo and a Nigel having a chat somewhere or other. To discover, I mean, where we are now on the world of discovery is we have probably discovered 0.0000001 of things that are yet to be discovered. Somebody once said to me, I think when the internet was invented, they said, well, we've fairly well invented everything now, haven't we? Must be coming towards the end. And I looked at them, I thought, you moron. We haven't even yet begun. And I just think space travel and actually the process of getting up there onto other planets, using the moon as a base to get onto Mars, and then using Mars as a base to get somewhere else. It is so exciting to be able to do this. I loved going into schools and saying to the kids, do you know, you're all going to be in flying cars. You're all going to be in flying cars. And I just think it's so exciting. Mm-hmm. And the process of going into space means that so many other things are going to be invented along the way, which is going to be to the benefit of mankind. Mm-hmm. So my bucket list, and I did bet a former researcher a bottle of champagne that I would stand on the moon, otherwise he gets the bottle of champagne. Well, I'm not paying him out yet.
You've got to make it happen.
I'm not paying him out yet. I once bumped into some, I can't remember his name now, but he's incredibly wealthy and he's got his own space program, and he was sending a spaceship up, I think it was last November, and I said to him, hey, just remember, if one of your crew drops out,
next one.
I am available, parliamentary time allowing. And he laughed.
So now you don't have to say that.
Now I don't need to say that. There's no inhibitors to me getting on that next spaceship up into space.
No, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me and allowing me to reminisce.